Welcome to Bruce Tracy Photography. Today we're going to be talking about this camera right here, the Canon R6 Mark II, and we're going to talk about its ability to shoot in low light, high ISO situations. So stick around. If you saw my last video, I made a video on 4 or 5 reasons why I picked this camera over the Canon R5. One of the main reasons was that this camera supposedly does a great job in low light situations shooting at high ISOs. The reason for that is it's a lower megapixel camera. The more megapixels you put on a sensor, you get a little bit more noise. Now I'm sure the R5 takes great indoor photographs, but I knew that the R6 Mark II supposedly was a little bit better in those high ISO situations, and that was a big reason why I picked up this camera. Now before I shot with the R6 Mark II, I was shooting with the Canon EOS R, which is a great camera. In fact, I think the EOS R is way underrated, but it does have one weakness that was just, it was too much for me. I needed to upgrade, and that was it's not a great tracking camera. When you're shooting sports, it doesn't track the subject nearly as good as, say, the R7, which is the camera I usually now use for sports, or the R6 Mark II. They do a much better job of tracking. So for that reason, I wanted to upgrade. This was the camera I went with. Now, last week I thought, you know what, I want to test this camera out. I want to see how it does in those low light situations. So what I did, and this is something I do quite often, is I jumped on the internet and I looked to see if there were any sporting events happening nearby. I lucked out. We got a small Christian college nearby called the Masters University. A little disclaimer here, I did get my California teaching credential from that school, so I do have a connection to it. But I saw that they had a basketball game and I thought, perfect. Those smaller schools are great for taking your camera to try to go get photographs. Bigger schools, professional sporting events, they're not going to let you take in a camera with different lenses on it, just the bigger professional looking cameras. They don't let them. But a smaller Christian school, no problem. So I knew I could take this in there and test it out. My goal was I wanted to see how it was going to shoot then at the low light at high ISOs. For basketball, you're shooting at 1/1000th of a second or faster. The lens I used was this guy right here, the Canon RF 24-105 4.0 L lens, which is my favorite lens pretty much for anything. This is just such a great all-around lens. But it's got that maximum of a 4.0 aperture, which meant indoors I was going to be shooting at a super high ISO. So what I did was I set this to 1/1000th of a second. I opened up my aperture all the way to 4.0, and then I let the camera choose the ISO for me. And when I started to shoot, I was shocked to find that this thing was shooting at ISO 10,000 and higher. Blew my mind, because my old camera, the EOS R, anything that I shot over 2000 ISO usually became too noisy for me. It just wasn't usable. But this thing's shooting at 10,000. I thought, there's no way. I'm not going to get anything with that. Shocked me. It shot 10,000 ISO. It shot 16,000 ISO. And when I looked in the back to check out my photos, they looked great. I thought, nah, that's fine. It's going to look good in camera, but wait till I get home. These photos are going to be incredibly noisy. Now, I like a little bit of noise. I like some grain in my indoor sports photos. But if you get too much, it just becomes unusable. So I was a little worried that when I got home and put these things up on my computer, I was just going to be sadly disappointed. But it was the complete opposite. These photos looked great. In fact, I used some of these photos that I shot at ISO 10,000, even ISO 16,000, and I put them in my portfolio. A couple months ago, if you'd have told me that I'd have photos in my portfolio that I shot at ISO 10,000 or above, I would have laughed. But this camera did such an unbelievable job of noise control that I shot these photos at those incredibly high ISOs, and they looked great. In fact, I'm going to show you some of those in just a second. Now keep in mind, when you look at these photos on YouTube, you lose a little bit of the quality factor. If you're looking at these on a computer or if you print them, they look incredible. You'll still get an idea though. I think even on YouTube, you're going to get an idea of how good a job this thing did with controlling the noise. Keep in mind, I always process my photos using Photoshop and Lightroom, but I did not use any noise reducing software, anything specifically just to reduce noise. So what you're looking at are photographs that haven't been adjusted to fix noise. This is what they look like. They look great. Also in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm going to go ahead and put the settings so you can get an idea of what I was shooting at. I think most of them was 1/1000th of a second. The ISO is going to be either ISO 10,000 or maybe even 16,000. And then 4.0, I'm thinking most of the shots I took wide open at 4.0. So let's go ahead and start the music and take a look at these photographs. I think you're going to be impressed with what a great job the Canon R6 Mark II does shooting at super high ISOs with low light situations. Well, there you go. Hopefully you got a good idea of what you can do with this camera shooting indoor sports. And keep in mind, this is a 4.0 aperture. This isn't one of those professional lenses where you're shooting at 1.2. So you can get really solid photographs even with a 4.0 lens. All right, thanks for coming with me today. I'll see you guys next time on Bruce Tracy Photography.